Hello everybody, Michael here again, McEwen Gunstocks. I thought I'd run through with you how I jig a project up in the machine. It might be some benefit to you that are hobbyists. Well, I am too. I guess I'm just like an advanced hobbyist because I've done like 100 gunstocks or more. But it might be of some value to you because these little checks can matter quite a bit to the success of the carving. So I start out with these pointed styluses, one in the router, one in the stylus holder, and touch them to the rotation shafts here at this end, and loosen the collet here that holds the this stylus, and adjust it so that they're both touching the top of the shaft. The next thing is to make sure that the rails are at that same height. So I use a piece of aluminum angle. I could switch this around so you can see. Use a piece of aluminum angle. Can I get over the top of it? Like that. And touch it here and see that they touch. If they don't, that would mean some significant machine adjusting here, because this is not something that's easily adjustable, but it would be a check to make on your own machine. And then I come down here and check that. I usually use this piece of angle the other way so I don't have to tip it over, but this is so you can see. Can you see? Let me move you a little closer, tip this up, and so come down here and touch this. If this is off, then the legs of the table this machine is on are adjustable with half 13, I believe, threaded rod with a nut welded on top and a lock nut, so I can adjust the tilt of the table. So that's square. Let me get this out of here. Not any hairy-carry. I'm going to go put it away, so stand by a moment. Then the next thing is these need to be at that same plane. So I come down and touch the top of this, and they do touch. Although actually I found about a 10 thou error, and I realized that an improvement for this would be to make this adjustable with some threaded adjustment and then lock nuts. So I started prepping some angle material for that, and on the next gunstock I carve, I'm going to add that as an upgrade for the machine. I've been using this machine for, I don't know, maybe well, a long time, probably 10 years, and yet I still continually find little improvements I can make to it. But the machine's really working great now. This would be hopefully the last, but it'd be another nice little adjustment feature. So I'm going to add that. But at 10 thou, it's close enough. I give about 30 to 40 thou of extra wood so that I have something to work with anyway. So that's just fine. Okay, so it's jigged square. The machine is square. The next thing I want to check is, do I have wood to carve everywhere? So I start out top to bottom, and here I can't get the stylus on the master, therefore that means there's wood to carve. Come up here, there's wood to carve, and then the top of the comb, this is always the tight spot on the top of the stock, and I've got about maybe 3/32. I don't think it's quite an eighth, but it might be, of clearance there. And of course there's going to be plenty of wood to carve back there. Now we flip it around the other side, and this is something that usually requires quite a bit of adjusting, especially with this blank. But not just this blank. Most gunstock blanks we buy are intended for the firearm industry, and firearms have a little bit different shape than most of our, especially PCP air guns do. We have more drop, we have bigger stocks, and it's always a challenge getting our project to fit out of what is available from the mill as a standard gunstock blank. So anyway, we're going to check here at the bottom of the pistol grip. This is always a real tight spot, and we got 3/30 seconds or so. And then this is the next real tight spot. Let me tip this down right back here at the heel, or toe. I'm dyslexic. I always get that backwards. That's why I'm always afraid to use the terms of the proper name of the top and bottom of the buttstock on video, because I have to check, make sure I'm using them correctly. But anyway, right here, we are just touching. There's basically no wood to carve here. But that's fine. Give me room to sand it, and I don't want to cut it too short on the top of the comb. I'd rather cut it short here because this is easy to reshape a little bit on the belt sander. Certainly when we put the recoil pad on the stock, that gets ground down on the belt sander, and this gets quite a bit of rounding, so the fact that it just touches and doesn't provide me any real wood to remove is just fine. Now, one thing I realized that I forgot was to check the length of pull. I'm 6 foot tall, and most of that is in my torso. I have short legs and long torso. The kids in basic training, I mean young adults, but in basic training made fun of me because I had an extra button showing on my shirt. But nonetheless, that gives me kind of long arms, so I have a 14.5 to 14.75 inch length of pull. And I had jigged this up and then was like, uh-oh, better check. So I pulled this back out again, and then I made a little adjustment here. I cut a little bit of material off of this mounting block so that the blank went a little bit more that way. So it gives me about the 1/8 inch or a little bit more than that extra wood I needed. Now I won't be able to carve that little bit of extra that I needed. I'll have to shape that on the belt sander afterwards. Would have been nice if I thought of that about that ahead of time and added some wood onto the master and got that shaped now. But this blank is such a close fit, and we're talking about such a small amount of extra wood. I'm just going to go for it, and if I'm not happy with the results and I need a little more length of pull, I'll just put a white line spacer on the recoil pad, which I was thinking about doing anyway. Add a little more bling to a bling-worthy blank. Wow, say that 3 times fast. Okay, next is check the sides. And of course, the cheek piece here is always going to be the high spot. But let's just make sure we have wood to carve on the forearm. We do. We do. And then coming along here, plenty of wood, plenty of wood. And then as we climb up here to the cheek piece, we got plenty of wood, about 1/8 of an inch there. And then let's just check back here, and of course there's plenty of room. And then we'll come around this way on this side. And again, wood to carve. Wood to carve. Now sometimes the palm swell can be a high spot on this side. Ton of room to carve. This is for FX Dreamline, and it's not a very wide action, so the stock is not very wide. Here on the rollover, plenty of room, and then this can be a high spot here, but there's a ton of wood. So that's all going to be great. The next thing I do is I take, roll this into view here so you can see what I'm doing. I take the pointy stylus out of the stylus holder and I put a long piece of drill rod in there. And then I come along, and now my homemade machine has adjustable head tilt, so I can tilt this so that the pointy stylus being held in the router, call it, will drag nicely and not dig into the wood. And remember that my stylus here is a 1/4 inch diameter, and so it's holding this away. So the fact that I'm missing the wood down here is fine. I know from when we were rolled up the other way that it's just touching, or I forget if it was just, yeah, it was just touching here. So I know that's fine, but I'm just going to go ahead and come along and trace this and scratch the blank. And I'm going to do this to make sure that I'm going to catch the figure and the grain direction the way I want it. You can see I've got a Sharpie mark on there that was just a rough check when I was choosing the blank to use. I just put the master on top and traced it in Sharpie to see, it looks nice. But this is going to be the accurate mark. And on this side, going to trace it. I'm just going to skip over all these cuts here and trace the top of the form. And so that looks good. Grain flow looks good. I wish that this blank had the grain flow sweeping up a little bit in the form. That is kind of preferred, but of course this is a PCP gun and there's no strength really required in the forearm, not like a brake barrel gun. But even at that, the grain is pretty straight, but you know, the ideal situation is to have a slight upsweep through the forearm. Of course, in the firearm world, I think people are a little more educated on these details, and it is those kinds of details that can give a blank the high dollar value. And it's the kind of things that I look for that are considered minor, but considered bummers for a high-end firearm application, and therefore keep the price of the blank at a modest level. So I look for blanks that have fantastic color and figure, and maybe have some little bummers in grain flow or some other aspect. So I'm going to trace this side, just see how it looks. And then I'll wet this blank down with some alcohol and let you see what it's going to look like, because it's pretty fantastic. Skip all those cutouts. I'm not going to copy these cutouts. I'm going to do them later on the milling machine. They're just too critical. Whoops, a little bit of Bondo there. I'll take care of that before I carve. Alright, and then do the other side. Now sometimes what we have to do is sacrifice something on the top and the bottom in order to fit. And that something would either be the comb or the bottom of the pistol grip. And so what we choose to sacrifice is the bottom of the pistol grip, and in that case we can put a grip cap on there, just add on another piece of contrasting wood to put the height back on where it needed to be. But this stock just fits in both of these dimensions. Let me put the camera on pause while I grab the isopropyl. Okay, for doing this cut, I've set the stylus and router bit at the same height, no feeler gauge. I want this one to be perfect. I still have to do some recutting later on the milling machine. And I got some compressed air fired up to clean this out as I go. chattering a lot. Let me check it out. Okay, so now it's about 4 hours later. I had to make a few changes. So I was nervous about very fully bedding the back of the action into the master, because it is what, a $1,200 plus gun, and it's got lots of little holes and stuff, and I had to wrap it in tape, and so I kind of did it minimally, thinking that what I really needed was just a datum at the bottom of the inletting to copy the shape. But I wasn't thinking about the fact that I also needed an entire flat surface to square this up. Where I left off filming a bit ago is I ran through all the jigging except for the last thing, which was after I get these, I've got a jig system here that holds these perfectly 90 degrees, and the final thing is to adjust the master using, down here, I got some adjustments here for its angle, and what I use as a datum is the inside of the inletting where I can. The top of the forearm seems like that would be an obvious datum, but even on factory stocks, they're never parallel to, or I should say never perpendicular to this, and I think it's this that is the important datum to use. So I cut a piece of 1-inch thick high density polyethylene, and it needed to be, I don't know, 20 or 25 thou thicker than that, so I built it up with tape, and then I put that in there and bedded it with Bondo, so that I have an absolutely perfect mirror smooth flat surface to square it up with. And this is the kind of thing that it would have been really easy after all that work getting it jigged where it was to say, oh, it's good enough. And I just don't like doing good enough. I mean, well, everybody has to have a good enough point on projects, but my good enough point is fairly close to perfection. Well, that's what I strive for. So that meant I had to cut the front block off and had to glue on a new front block and rejig everything, which took a long time, and I'm probably leaving out some things I did, but the final step here is I'm ready now to block off the top of this, and then I'll do the inletting. And so to cut the top of it flat, I'm using a 3/4 inch, I think that's 3/4, flat bottom bit, and then I've got a chunk, maybe 1/4 inch aluminum here I put underneath the bit and set the stylus to my level datum here, so that with this removed, I think you ought to be able to see in the camera that there's a gap here. So I am not going to cut it all the way down in my first pass, because we're going to remove a lot of wood. And it's just a lot of torquing and pressure, and well, often it's a lot of wood. This is not a huge amount, but it's some. So I don't want to take it all the way down to the final depth on the first pass. I'd like to do it in 2 or 3 steps so that the last cut is hardly removing any, and there's no real torque or pressures going on the master or the workpiece. And then of course you see that I've got this mounted up sideways, and for you home duplicator people out there that might look in on this channel, I encourage you, especially that unit that's sold on eBay, with it's just 2 rails with slide bearings, to come up with some way, put that in a table, put some sides on it somehow, so that you have a way of bracing the master, because master flex is what causes undercutting, or I should say overcutting. It's okay if extra wood is left, you can work that, but you can't put wood back that was erroneously removed. And if the master flexes, and there's a lot of inertia here, so if I come down boom on the master and it flexes, the router just cut out too much wood. And the same thing sideways. When I'm down here in the inletting, the router bit puts a lot of torque. The router bit is torquing over here, but it's pulling on the stylus here. So if the master flexes, then you just got too much wood removed. So I've also got a 1/2-20 all-threaded rod here with a quill stop, one of those split, I guess a split nut spring-loaded split nut thing. I think it's called a quill stop. And then I turned a piece high-density polyethylene as a little stopper at the top of it, and adjust that up so that it can't go down, can't go sideways. For a long time, I actually also held the work and all the way through the other side of the table, and I just didn't really give it much thought, although it was kind of a pain in the butt because I would have to cut off some material on the bandsaw to clear the all-thread rod going underneath it. But after, I don't know, a number of years of doing it that way, all of a sudden one day I realized that this actually doesn't have to be held. This is the guy that gets the flexing. So this seems to be sufficient right here. Alright, so I'm going to suit up here, eyes, ears, nose, and make some cuts.